everyone. I am Sierra Royster. I am with April, which is the Associations of Programs for Rural Independent Living. This is the peer-to-peer interactive workshop for SILs and CILs. How does the HCBS final settings rule apply to your state IL network? And this is a collaboration presentation with April and NASILC. So we welcome and thank you for joining us today. A couple of housekeeping things to get started. First, when you scroll over the screen, a menu bar should pop up. Depending on what device you are on, you can find that menu bar at the top or at the bottom of your screen. There's where you can find the closed captioning for today's session. You can view the captioning by selecting the CC tab on the menu bar. For sign language interpreter, you can find the interpreter on the screen with the names Interpreter Doris or Interpreter Jen. So if you are only able to see the speaker, make sure you are in the gallery view so you can see the interpreter and presentation at the same time. We will go into screen share at some points during the presentation today. You can make people larger or smaller by sliding the bar in the middle of the screen if you need to. And then we also have Spanish interpretation for today's call. There'll be a globe icon on the menu bar. Please select the interpretation button and you can select Spanish. If you want to hear only Spanish, select mute original audio, and then you can just hear the Spanish translation. So if you have any technical issues, please use the chat feature today. You can find the word bubble in that same menu bar. Once that is selected, you will be allowed to follow along with the chat or add in your comments. If you would like to turn the chat feature off, if you're using screen area, you can do that by pressing Alt-H. And then if you have a question or want to make a comment, today we are holding this in a meetings platform on purpose. We really wanted to make sure that everybody could engage in the conversation, ask questions, and really jump in to everything that we're saying. So we definitely encourage everybody to join in those Q&A spots during the presentation, but also if you have questions throughout, we definitely are welcoming those and we want to talk through them. So please feel free to do that. For those that are on the phone today that would like to jump into the conversation or are using keystrokes, we ask that you press *9 or Alt-Y on your keypad to raise your hand. We'll then let you know you can unmute and you can select the unmute option, Alt-A if using keystrokes. And that mute and unmute bar is also, button is also on that menu bar. And then you are more than welcome to join us by video cam if you have that ability today as well. So we definitely thank you all for joining us. Again, I'm Sierra Royster. I am a white female woman in her 30s with brown hair and a teal shirt on today. And I will be facilitating part of the conversation as we bounce from different speaker to speaker, and then also helping out with any of the chat questions or anything that we see in there. So if you have any questions, please feel free to message me and I can help you with any of the technical questions, but also making sure that all the questions you may have for today's presentation are getting answered. So now I'm actually going to turn it over to Amber, who is our first speaker today, who's going to share a lot of knowledge with us. So go ahead, Amber.
Hi there, Sierra. Thank you. This is Amber O'Haver, and I am here on behalf of NASILC in a contractor role and capacity for today. And I am an individual with significant disabilities, physical, neurodiverse, and mental health. And I identify as she, her, hers. And I also am a white individual in my mid-40s, long blonde hair, blue eyes. I have a black sort of grayish top on, v-neck top on today, and some pearl earrings in. And I don't think I missed anything, but I have a headband, if I didn't say it, and my hair, black headband pulled back, and very, very long blonde hair. So that's my introduction of who I am. Several of you may recognize me or know my face or my voice or my name just because I have worked in the independent living space for many, many years, working at a Center for Independent Living in various leadership roles, and then also was the executive director for the ND and a SILC for several years too, and have transitioned out of that role and am leading down a path of something different and new and exciting. So At that, I will turn it over to Kathy really quickly here so she can introduce herself, and then I'll jump back into our first slide.
Thanks, Amber. My name is Kathy Cooper. I'm the executive director of the Kansas Silk. My pronouns are she and her. I am a white woman in my 50s with blonde, curly, slightly curly hair. I have a multicolored sweater on today, and my background is blurred. Send it back to you, Amber.
This is Amber. Thanks, Kathy. So it looks like our other speaker, Kimberly, I believe she is here now. She wants to hop on and introduce herself. That'd be great.
Hey everyone, I'm so sorry for being late. That's just kind of been going on today. So I am Kimberly Tiso. I am the president and CEO of Able, South Carolina. My pronouns are her and she. And I am a white woman with short, blonde, curly hair, and I'm wearing black eyeglasses and a plaid top. And I have some Valentine decorations in the back and then a sign that says "A right delayed is a right denied" by Martin Luther King Jr. I'm so happy to be here with you all.
So this is Amber. Thank you, Kimberly. Sierra, would you mind pulling up our set of slides, please? Thank you. And I'll give everyone a minute, including myself, to sort of readjust their screen and get settled here before I jump in. Okay. So this is our intro slide, and it says April NASILC peer-to-peer interactive workshop for SILs and CILs. How does the HCBS Home and Community-Based Services Final Settings Rule apply to your state IL network? And today is Tuesday, January 31st, 2023. Next slide, please. And we've already done the welcome and intro. So the HCBS settings rule. This is just a bit of a review for those of you that have already received some information about it or somewhat familiar with it, or just sort of want to learn more about it initially. So what is the HCBS settings rule? So it is a federal rule, and in the slides, which anyone can have access to if they would like, we can make sure we get those to you. If you just want to put a request in the chat or email us. And you can find parts of this rule in 42 CFR, parts 430, 431, 435, 436, 440, 441, and 447. And this rule, believe it or not, was issued in January of 2014. And so a really quick and easy way to sum up really what this is through its sort of purpose. And the way I look at it, or we look at it, is this rule is a tool for really promoting and accessing a life fully integrated in the community. So it's applicable to all people with disabilities of all kinds. It's applicable to all settings that receive HCBS funding in a state, home and community-based services funding in a state. And that typically is federal funds through Medicaid. And states must ensure all settings that receive this HCBS funding are compliant with this rule per their HCBS, home and community-based services, state transition plans by March 17th of 2023. I will just comment that the compliance date has been pushed back many, many, many times, not only because of the pandemic, but also change in administration from Obama to others, and at the federal government level. And it has really just sort of wreaked havoc on getting the states to really ensure this rule is implemented and that the transition of settings are compliant has taken almost 10 years. So, which is unfortunate, but we all know government doesn't move quickly. So why is the rule needed and important? States and HCBS, home and community-based services funded providers, are still providing these settings mimicking institutions, violating the autonomy of our peers with disabilities. It also is important and needed because the rule codifies, puts into law, protections and rights for our peers with disabilities in home and community-based services, or HCBS funded settings, to expand choice and control over their lives in their homes and communities. And then Kathy, I think you're going to jump in and add a little bit of more background and information to this over what's taken place over the last 9, almost 10 years.
Yes. Okay, so I just want to give everybody a little bit of background on the CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and what they're doing. They're literally doing site visits. And in 22 and 23, approximately 15 states have received or will receive a site visit from CMS. Kansas is one of those. We're slated for March 14th. We're like right up there against the deadline of the 17th. As of October 31st of 2022, CMS had completed 7 site visits. And I know that since then they have done just a couple more for sure, and they're trying to finish up in these last 3 months. But let's see. So CMS selected these visits by states who submitted to CMS heightened scrutiny criteria. So the stakeholders identified as meeting the requirements for heightened scrutiny. And we'll get into that, I think, a little bit later of exactly what heightened scrutiny means, but it's basically when a setting isn't meeting all of the requirements, or there's concern that they're not meeting all of the requirements. So the site visit team, when they come, they visit lots of different settings, including assisted living facilities, which includes memory care units, adult daycare centers, group homes, settings that provide day services, sheltered workshops, intentional communities and campus settings, and farmsteads. And the site visit teams, they have visited like all 3 categories of the presumptively institutional settings. So settings in the same buildings as a public or private institution, settings on the grounds of or adjacent to public institution, and settings that have qualities that isolate Medicaid beneficiaries. I think a lot of times in the IL field, we think, oh, well, you know, it's not an HCBS setting. We don't have to worry about that because it's not in an institution or a nursing home. But quite honestly, just in my experience with what we're going through in Kansas, it has been shocking to me to find out who is providing HCBS settings and the settings, or HCBS services and the settings they're doing it in. So this has been very eye-opening. The site visit team, just to give you a little idea of who they're composed of, it's not only CMS, but it's also ACL, the Administration for Community Living, and New Addition staff, which I'm quite honestly, I'm not sure what that is, but they also have had state Medicaid staff or state waiver operating agency staff. So in your state, whoever does that, whoever is the agency in Kansas, it's the Kansas Department of Aging and Disability Services. So I assume that they will be joining CMS and ACL when they come to Kansas. The team typically receives a tour of the setting, reviews person-centered service plans and other documents that are on site, and speaks with HCBS beneficiaries and direct support professionals. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of what's happening during these site visits for the settings. So I'll send it back to you, Amber.
This is Amber. Thanks, Kathy. Kimberly, I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to add or tag on to any of that. If not, I will share an example, just one of like one of those types of sites that are red flags in terms of heightened scrutiny.
Yeah, and a lot of times, so some of the reviews too, I do want to make sure that folks know, especially if there's going to be reviews in your state. some of the reviews, are requiring you to reach out to people that are currently living in these facilities. And so you've got to really think outside the box with how do we ensure that the rights are being protected and that we're hearing the consumer voices. And so I do want to mention a little bit more about that shortly, but I'll hand it back to Amber.
Thanks, Kimberly. So I will just say an example of one of those types of heightened scrutiny sites are where you have a nursing home and then on one wing, and then the other wing of that same building, right, you might have an assisted living facility. And what makes it sort of that, adds it or would potentially throw up a red flag for heightened scrutiny of that potential HCBS site is that there's shared staff between the nursing home and the assisted living facility. There isn't much separation between the two. They might eat all in the same dining room or have access to food in that same space. They also the staff doesn't really understand or distinguish much between the two varying wings from nursing facility to assisted living facility, and sort of treat and support the individuals in the same manner and in the same way without really understanding sort of the difference between the two varying types of spaces that folks are residing in. So on that note, I will have Sierra switch us to the next slide. So Kimberly, I don't know if you want to go through these or kind of we can all tag team, but I'll let you take this on. And since you already brought up the protections and rights, and
absolutely. So we're going to talk a little bit about the settings rule and what it has to encompass. And remember that the settings rule is, and we'll get to this shortly, is not a service. And so it's really critical for Centers for Independent Living and SILCs to be involved in the plan, because you remember our saying, nothing about us without us. We should be at the table when anyone or any policies are created about people with disabilities. And so just wanted to talk about some of the rules that require individuals to receive services in residential and non-residential home and community-based funded settings. So they do have the right to be integrated in and have full access to life in the greater community. So there should be a plan in the final rule where people that are living in residential or congregate type of settings do have the choice. And so that should be outlined in that choice in the plan, a choice of services, including self-direction and providers. And so a provider cannot just be assigned to a consumer. The consumer has that option to decide for them. And so the plan has to include information about that. Choose their residential setting and have a lease or legally enforceable agreement in line with federal or state fair housing and landlord tenants. So remember that the ADA does not control over housing, the Fair Housing Act does. And so making sure that, they do have options for requesting of accommodations within the place that they're in as well. So making sure that it does follow the federal and state fair housing laws. But a lot of the consumers that are living in these facilities should also have a lease that talks about the rules and what they can and can't do so that they have an understanding. Now in our state, they do have leases, but they can't read the language of the lease a lot of times because it's not done in plain language or easy read or any language that is understandable to anybody besides attorneys. And so that's something that we need to ensure that these lease agreements are in language that is accessible for individuals. Choose the service they receive during the day and where they receive the services, including the settings that are not only for people with disabilities. So we don't want to house just people with disabilities in one setting in the community or in housing. And so do they get the option of going to the malls, going to church, going to be with peers without disabilities? Privacy, respect, and dignity. So particularly in the home, including the locks on their doors, the entrances. Do they have locks on their bedroom doors? I know that we had some issues at one time in our state where there were cameras that were in the bedrooms and the hallways and the living areas. And so that is definitely an issue with the privacy and respect and dignity of someone. Imagine having cameras on you at all times in your house. And then just freedom from undue influence or any type of restraint, seclusion. So making sure that they've got that all in the plan. So the plan has to cover to make sure that not only folks are safe, but their rights are being protected at all times.
Really quick, there was somebody that had a question. They had their hand raised. Go ahead. I see your hands up. Oh, we can't hear you. You're still muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank
There you
you.
go.
So, I wanted to just quickly ask Kimberly, the quote that you said before you got into everything, can you please repeat that when you're done? Thank you.
Yes. And so what I said was nothing about us without us. And so rules, policies, any type of laws, if it's about people with disabilities, we have to make sure that people with disabilities are included in these at the table and included in the direction of these policies. But as SILs and CILs, we're supposed to be led by people with disabilities. And so it's really critical for us to be involved in this process, but also to ensure that the rights are being protected of individuals with disabilities, but also making sure that we're including our consumers in these conversations.
Yes, thank you so very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And just a clarification for everybody. So the slides and the recording will be posted to our website along with sent out afterwards. Once we're able to download the recording, we will send it out to everybody that registered. So if you were on this call, you had to register to get in. So you will get a copy of the recording along with the slides. So no worries for all those in the chat. I'll kick it back over to you, Kimberly.
And then Sarah, if we could go to the next slide as well. And I always think of the home and community-based service setting, although it is for the state that you are in. I also think of it kind of like an IEP, an individualized education plan for students with disabilities, where it outlines everything that how a student's rights would get protected. It's similar to that as with HCBS setting. The rules are exactly how it should lay out how people are having their rights protected and ensure that they have dignity and respect and ensure that they have privacy and all of that. So that's really important to make sure that we think of this more as a rule and it's not a service. This is not a service. HCBS is a service. And so that will be explained in a little while. So the rule requires folks to have the option to live alone or select their roommates. I don't know if you all remember college days, not being able to select your roommate could be really, really rough, right? Well, same with folks that are living in any kind of residential setting, is they do have that right to select their roommates. If they're not compatible, they should have the right to ask to move to a different location or request another roommate. And so that needs to be laid out as well. Decorate and fill the home with furnishing that they like. I know in South Carolina, this was not an issue for a lot of our folks, that they got to choose like the color of the paint for their bedrooms, their bedding. They could choose their bedding, everything kind of in the house. They could decorate as they wish. And that should be the case for people because this is essentially their home. Control their daily schedule and choice of daily life activities. And so this was an area that we saw a lot of concerns in South Carolina where they had scheduled outings. And so it wasn't the consumers that actually got to pick where they went. It was the providers that got to pick. And if the consumers did not want to go out on an outing, they could not stay home alone. And so that was one of the issues that we reported. Control or access and prepare foods and snacks at any time. I know that snacks are important. I know I just had a snack before I got on, and that's important for everyone. And so being able to have access to food of what your choice is and get to decide what the menu looks like is really important. And so again, the rule has to lay out how all of this is going to be. Access and prepare food or work in competitive integrative employment. So remember, I know that Kathy mentioned that sheltered workshops are considered a congregate setting type. It's where people with disabilities are only housed together, and they are working on they're working some meaningless task, and they're getting paid less than minimum wage. And so making sure that consumers have the option and should have the rights in your state to work in the community that is competitive and integrated with peers without disabilities. And so in South Carolina, that was easy for us to put in our plan because we just ended some minimum wage last year. And so that was something that we're already ahead on, that's not going to be an option to work in these congregate settings. Physical accessibility and reasonable accommodations, and making sure that consumers have that option to request that, or if there's a need, if they're not able to be independent in the setting of their choice, they should be able to also receive accommodations to make them more independent in that setting. Again, and then just control and manage their personal asset and resources, and having that option. A lot of the consumers in South Carolina did not even get that as an option to be able to control their finances. And so it was automatically really essentially taken from them as soon as they moved into a facility. And I will pass it back to Amber.
This is Amber. Thank you, Kimberly. Sierra, if you could jump to the next slide. I think it might be a Q&A time. Oh, nope, I'm wrong. One more slide to go. So we'll go through this really quickly. So the HCBS settings rule, and again, what is the IL applicability? How does this relevant to the Independent Living Network and to SILs and CILs? So basically, a lot of what we've already said is probably hinted at and really sort of driven down a little bit into, and you should be picking up on the fact that, this rule really does support the IL philosophy, supports true choice, control, and autonomy of an individual, supports authentic community living, and supports the work that SILCs and CILs have been doing for decades. So, and this is the part where we really want to mention and sort of try to clarify that what the rule is not is a service. So it really just is a way to support all the work that we are doing in terms of HCBS services and continue to do as SILs and CILCs in our states and communities. And it allows us to be able to actually leverage a lot of what is in now state law when it comes to these rights and protections that all of our peers are guaranteed and supposed to have and need to have because the law says it is so. So the one thing I do want to also point out, though, is that this rule does not apply to nursing homes or skilled care facilities, intermediate care facilities for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities or IDD, and mental health institutions. So I don't know if Kathy or Kimberly want to add anything else to that. If not, I think the next slide is where we jump into Q&A and can kind of engage in some conversation with folks here today.
And,
So
and
this
Amber, go ahead, Kathy.
Sorry, Kim. This is Kathy. So I will say that I have seen some questions in the chat. We will get into like what role does the SILC play, and probably more about what SILs can do as well. So we will really get into the weeds on that kind of stuff as well.
And I know that in our state, we really pushed back because community residential care facilities, which are smaller assisted living type of facilities, are not really recognized as being a setting for the final rule. And so that's some pushback and some advocacy that our organization has done to ensure that the voices of people living in these community residential care facilities are included, but our state does not recognize that. But these are more smaller group homes that people should have a choice to live in. And so in our state, we call them community training homes.
Okay, so are we ready to go to the questions at all? Sounds like it.
This is Amber. Yes, Sierra, if you want to jump in, I think you have a question to kind of pose to the group. And then we can also kind of start jumping in, do some conversation that way. And then before you do that, I have a question. What if we could get sort of maybe an idea from folks? Would you prefer to have the conversation with this screen share off so we can see each other and engage more effectively with each other and have a discussion that way? Or would you guys? Okay.
That'd be cool.
That work for everybody? Okay. And then we can pop them back on. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sarah, go for it.
Yeah, so I just wanted, or I guess all of us really just wanted to know, what ways are you all within your SILC or within your CIL, so Statewide Independent Living Council or Center for Independent Living, are you all using the HCBS settings rule specifically within your work? How is that coming into any of your work, or what does that look like within your organizations? And just because I know a lot of people have joined afterwards and sometimes we need refreshers and encouragement, this will be your encouragement. The mute is on the menu bar. You can always jump in there, and then *6 unmute you as well if you are on the phone. And also if you would like, you can join my webcam as well. So is anybody doing any of this work within your organizations with the HCBS settings rule?
So this is Kathy with Kansas again. I just want to make sure, don't feel like you should. I mean, hopefully people are starting to talk about this and understand this, but quite honestly, until I heard about this, I want to say probably back in May of 2022, I wasn't involved in it. The Kansas SILC wasn't involved in it. I think this has really just started to gain momentum because ACL has put out the contracts and asked for different groups to come together and work on this. So don't feel like you are like you should have all this stuff. Kansas has stuff, but it's only because we're getting ready to have a CMS site visit. But honestly, some people are probably going to be pretty new and pretty fresh on this. So just keep that in mind, that it's not like everybody else is doing it or anything like that. So please feel free to ask any questions, get any types of clarification.
I see in the chat, sorry, I was going to just say real quick, the Florida SILC is organizing a work group around barriers to LTSS and personal care assistance to add to our next spill. So it sounds like some work starting there. Go ahead, Kimberly.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add off of Kathy too. I know that when these work groups got started in South Carolina, it was really within state agencies. And so the state agencies really came together. You have to kind of push your way into sometimes those work groups and maybe building that relationship with the Medicaid department within your state. I know that's what we did, and we were invited, and we also had the other centers for independent living in our state included as well. So we were at the table during the planning of this of our final rule. We got consumer stakeholder input and really added value. And I believe, just from observations of the work group, just the Centers for Independent Living, we were really the only ones that were pushing consumer control, because person-centered is somewhat different, but we were really going a step above person-centered with consumer control to really ensure that consumers are at the table and leading this. So you may not have been invited, but sometimes that's part of the advocacy in all of us. We've got to kind of wiggle ourselves to be involved at that table.
And I see in the chat too, Carrie England said, in California, most of the efforts have been at the CIL level, the CIL level. As a SILC, we are discussing, but honestly, I need more info, which is why I'm here. We do have an LTSS group, which I will take this back to. And then Brooke in Oregon says, the Oregon SILC and CILs participated in an ACL pre-meeting for the HCBS Oregon site visit scheduled for April.
So this is Amber, and I just want to say, I wish so very, very much now I would have been more familiar with this rule when I was working at a Center for Independent Living a handful of years ago, because it would have given me so much more credibility when I said to a provider, yeah, you can't have a camera in this person's bedroom on 24/7. Real situation. It would have given me a lot more teeth. It would have given me a lot more opportunity to say, the rule doesn't allow this. This is not okay. And this has to change. So examples like that, I am sure those of you from CILs here today experience a lot of violations of all the various rights and protections, probably on a daily basis with your consumers that Kimberly went through. And if you guys have some examples of those to kind of start talking about, that would be fantastic. And maybe that's a good place to start engaging in some of this Q&A and conversation. So if you've had situations where you're working with someone and transitioning them out of a nursing home and getting them back into the community, but maybe the assisted living facility they're looking at moving in doesn't have locks on their doors, or says, yeah, well, they can only have guests from this time to this time during the day, or no one on Friday evenings, or any of those kind of things. And there's, the list is probably endless, quite frankly, in terms of like all the violations around the rights and protections that we went through, that a lot of our peers experience in these settings. So maybe if you guys want to share some of those examples, or sort of what you've witnessed, or what's happened to you or any of your fellow folks that you know are issues in your state going on in these settings.
And then I see there is a question in the chat. Herschel asked, I hope I am understanding correctly. CMS are making in-person visits to state regarding HCBS. Is there a listing of when and where in the state CMS is visiting?
That's a great question. So yes, states are visiting and coming to states for these what are called heightened scrutiny visits that Kathy mentioned. So Kathy, I don't know if you want to kind of dig into that a little bit more and respond in addition to that, but yes, I don't believe they're going to occur in every state, but I know they're going to hit quite a few of them and already have. Indiana's been one. I know Kansas is coming up. Kimberly had a heightened scrutiny visit from CMS in South Carolina. So, you know, they're happening all across the country. So go ahead, Kathy.
Yeah, this is Kathy again. So to my understanding, only 15 for 2022 and 2023. So 15 states total. There could have been some states done before that. I'm just not aware of it. Again, you know, IL is really coming into this late to the game. I know in Kansas, a lot of it, when I first heard about this, I started asking around, and I asked my centers, I said, hey, is there already a group put together for this? Who's meeting on this? And quite honestly, the answer that I got was, oh, well, yeah, we went to like one meeting, but we're really just letting, you know, the IDD group take care of that. And so I think that's why ACL kind of pushed this out on saying, hey, we want to get way more stakeholders involved. We want to get more IL involved, was because they didn't want it just to be a few select groups who were working with stakeholders on these settings rules. So I don't want to go into a ton, because I am going to go into a ton about Kansas and what we've done and how a SILC can really help. And how SILCs can work with their centers and all that. So I don't want to jump the gun on too much of that, but yeah, not all the states have had this, but you're going to see more and more states. They're coming to your state. And if you know who your agency is that works with CMS on the HCBS stuff, That's how you can find out if they've already come to your state, if they're coming to your state, if your state has turned in a transition plan, if there were any heightened scrutiny settings on that plan or in that for your state. So that's really a key.
And I just wanted to add real quick. So CMS is scheduling these scrutiny visits, and what Kathy said was like 15 states so far scheduled for last year and this year. And what is happening is the ACL is then saying, hey, we want to do a pre-meeting. And that's what Brooke had mentioned in the chat. And so they kind of do a prep meeting to talk about how can you highlight some of the issues? Who are these partners? They'll invite all those stakeholders and those partners on that prep call to kind of get you all aligned so that when that call does happen, you can all be there, share that piece, share any information and all of those kind of things, any examples, any particular sites. But then the CMS will come and do a site visit. They'll give you the time, the day and time they'll be there, but they won't tell you where. They kind of do that on their own. And that's not something that we go to. So that is not where IL will go. You come to that first call with CMS and you kind of guide them on some issues that are happening within your state. And that's where we give that guidance. And that's where it's really impactful. And I will say, NASILC and April are part of some of those stakeholders. So our job within this is to educate everyone on this, but also is to push that information to make sure the SILs in the states are on those calls. You're getting that information from us. And then we're sending you maybe some prep information. You can also reach out to NASILC and April to ask questions to prep you for those calls if you have more questions or want to know some of those partners. So that's kind of our role, is to make sure that we're getting all IL to the calls, so you can make sure your voice is heard. So if you haven't seen it already, we did just start doing this in October, but and Amber has this in the PowerPoint later on that will be sent, but I'm going to drop it into the chat just as well, so you have it in multiple places. But there's a list of where they've already been in the reports that have been done. And we'll talk a little more about the reports in a little bit, but you can see if they've come to your state. And if your state's not on there, they haven't come yet. So you might be coming up sooner or later.
And in South Carolina, when we had our CMS Act was actually in South Carolina last week, and we helped CMS kind of learn the issues that people with disabilities were experiencing in these settings. And so we did some pre-work, we sent some surveys out, we did some interviews with consumers to really represent the consumers so that when CMS comes, they know what to ask folks and they know where to find individuals that are having significant right issues. And so I really took that as a really proud moment for our organization, because we really got to bring the concerns that consumers around our state are experiencing, and really make sure that CMS looks into these specific issues so we can make change.
And before we move on, I know y'all are going to jump into your examples. I think this is a really important question. Could you distinguish between person-centered and consumer-controlled for those not familiar with the two terms?
So, so this is a hot topic, and especially in the world of social work. So MSWs and BSW folks, they are always talking about person-centered. Person-centered is when you come to a table and the person who you're working with is there with you, and there's folks around, so different providers that are providing input, but the individual is supposed to be taking charge. What we see in person-centered planning is it is a team. It's a team of providers, family members, whoever they want to be there. So they do get that choice of who they want at the table, but we often see having people ideas put into folks to make those decisions of what others want of them. Consumer control is what Centers for Independent Living practice. So we're all consumer driven, and that is a step up from person-centered. So person-centered, the way that I look at person-centered is it's okay, but we really are trying to aim for consumer control, where the consumer is leading the meetings and they are telling you exactly what they want for themselves. And you could absolutely provide some support in those meetings, but they should be ultimately making the decisions and even setting the agenda for these types of meetings. So I think we're all aiming for, consumer driven one time, but we'll work with person centered as of right now until we can continue to push consumers to truly have that control over every day. And a great example that we've seen in person-centered planning is maybe a parent will be at that table and a parent will say, well, you really like it in that workshop that you go to. You have friends there and you get a color and you get to paint your nails and you really like it. And they're like, oh yeah, that's great. But they're not having those ideas. They're not leading those ideas or that discussion. And so that's so person-centered can be, it depends on who is leading the person-centered practices, but that is not what centers for independent living should be practicing. We should be getting information from our consumers. So I hope that made sense. Amber?
This is there. I just want to say the way I describe it is really like consumer directed. You were in the driver's seat. You were driving that car, driving the choices, driving what happens for your life. You are in control. And person-centered, I tend to say, well, sometimes you're in the back seat and sometimes you're in the passenger seat. Sometimes we find people in the trunk. And I mean that in terms of folks are there, but often the person with a disability is not very much engaged or involved and getting to actually really determine how they want their life to look and move forward in terms of the services they receive and how they receive those and where they receive those and where they live and if they work and where they work, and the list goes on and on and on. So driver's seat versus passenger seat, back seat, that's kind of the easiest way I can sort of describe it for folks to sort of break it down in that way. And that just sort of helps to distinguish that. So what you will find in a lot of spaces outside of independent living is that folks, social workers in particular, and some other individuals and providers will use the terms interchangeably, and they are not the same. They are two very, very different things, supported by different philosophies and sometimes even different values and ways of thinking and beliefs. So I'll just leave it there because I think we have a question.
I was going to say really quick before we go to the question, there was a question in the chat that we're going to get to of how can SILCs or CILs get involved in the site review process. We will get to that, but I will say this is one way that CILs and SILCs can be a part of that process. When you're at those meetings and they start talking about person-centered plans, if we from IL are sitting at that table and go, tell me more about that. How is that being done? So who's leading that? If we're starting that conversation and asking those questions to make sure that the person with the disability that the meeting is for and about is also leading that meeting, before a meeting ever happens, then we are already doing some of that advocacy work within those different stakeholder groups. So that's just one way that you could do that. But I do see a hands up. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Khalid Rashid. I'm a systems change advocate with DRAIL in California in the Central Valley. And thank you for holding this meeting because I have no information. I'm like coming in, I'm like, so tell me more. But I clicked on the link that you guys provided and California is on the list. But okay, so now we know that California, they've came to California already. What does everything mean, like with the letters and stuff like that? Is the initial approval addendum, is that where the state provided them the information and let them know what they need to do?
So this is really quick. I was going to say the link that I posted, actually the third column, California doesn't have anything. So you have not had one yet. So that's where, when we're talking about these visits, that third column is where you're going to look. Sorry.
Okay.
That's okay. So this is Amber. So what that link, what's really nice, and this is also going to be in the PowerPoint presentation, you guys, and you can click, you can access the link from there too as well. So that link takes you to a page that you will find every single state listed, right? Because every state is required to have an HCBS state transition plan. And in addition to that, it'll list all the various steps and all the different types of addendums and changes and initial proposed plans over the last 9 years that have happened for that state. That is typically like that middle column And then the column that Sierra mentioned, the one furthest to the right, sort of that third from the left over column. Some states will have something in there if CMS has come to your state and done a heightened scrutiny review, and they have completed and finished the report of that review that they came and did. And in that report, it'll list all of the various sites that they visited, and then what they maybe found was out of compliance or in violation of the rule, and then is suggesting, you know, corrective action plans and changes the state has to submit to CMS about how they're going to work with those settings where there were issues found or where sites were cited, if you will, for being in non-compliance with the rule, and how states are going to work with those settings to get them in line with the rule and in compliance by March 17th. So that is the gist of sort of that page. So it's a combination of all the different statewide transition plans for every single state and all of the different steps and information and back and forth communication from CMS for those states. And then on the other far right column are those heightened scrutiny reports, if they've been done and have posted them. You know, it's turnaround times taking about, I think, 6 to 8 weeks for them to get a report finalized and sent out to a state. So just that's sort of the time frame that we're looking at, which is actually pretty quick, quite frankly, for CMS, I feel like. So hopefully that's helpful in terms of describing that page. So it's kind of a mix of different things on there, but that is where everything is housed through CMS that you guys can access.
And you can look at your plan for your state and see what organizations were involved. And so that's really important to look at. I know in South Carolina, it does have our organization listed as a task force. And so that's really important. But if you feel like you're missing from the table, making sure that consumer-led organizations are at the table is something that you could push.
And so this is Kathy, and this is where SILCs come into play. I found out about CMS coming to Kansas because ACL reached out and said, who should be on the call for this? Because ACL and CMS, well, specifically CMS, they didn't know who to ask for this. So they reached out to the SILC, and I said, oh, well, you're going to need this group, this group, this group, and this group. And I was able to send them contact information. The project that ACL is doing with CMS that involves the national stakeholders, ACL is doing a pretty good job of reaching out to these national stakeholders and asking them, hey, so if we're going to, and I'm just picking a state here, Texas next, who should we contact? And then those stakeholder groups can say, oh, well, we know that the person to contact for the Texas SILC is this person. And then from there, you know, the SILC can then help them say, oh, well, here's the centers, here's the protection and advocacy agencies, here's the IDD council, here's everybody you should have. And that's how it worked in Kansas. And like I said, I had no real idea of what was going on in Kansas until I started really doing the research. I went on the state agency site who handles the home and community-based services. And I literally just typed in a search on that page that said HCBS settings rule. And lo and behold, up popped a whole nother website completely dedicated to this. It had the HCBS transition plan for Kansas. It had all the providers that were receiving HCBS services. It had the ones that were going through the heightened scrutiny. So it was quite a knowledge place to go to and really learn about what was happening in my state. So I encourage SILCs to first start there. Find out who your agency is that does the HCBS in your state. Hopefully you know who that is already, because quite honestly, the whole reason we have the ex officios on the SILC board is because they're supposed to be that disability agency. So not just your DSC, but any other disability agencies you have in your state. You know, if you're utilizing it correctly, you can have an ex officio on your SILC for that. In Kansas, we do. We had one from the Kansas Department of Aging and Disability Services. So that's another option that you have to go to find out what your state is doing if they've already been approached by CMS, if there's a group already together. I signed up for the listserv, got on that group through that state agency, but then I also contacted some of my centers and said, hey, do you know about this? What's going on? The next thing that really kind of happened was when ACL said, who should we contact in Kansas? I gave them a list of people. They contacted those people and they said, CMS is coming. When can you all meet? And it's this ACL before meeting. And ACL has been great, and they've come in and they've said, here's what you can expect. They've been very kind of frank about the things that CMS is looking for and how this works. It's been actually pretty refreshing. But they came in and they told us, here's what has happened in other states. Here is what CMS has found in those other states. Here's what we encourage you as your state coming up for this to do. And Amber, is it okay? Can I just roll into what we did? I kind of am. I know.
Yeah, I was gonna say roll into that,
Okay.
and I think Siri, I might have you then just pop up that slide for just 1 minute that kind of really is speaking to exactly what we're rolling into here, describing SILCs and CILs and how we get involved and engaged and kind of, on this rule. So this is what we're really talking about, how to engage as a SILC, and different ways you can be involved in your state as a SILC or a CIL, and how the rule kind of ties and supports all of the various types of, work in these areas. So, which is for SILC systems advocacy, and collaboration and partnership development. And then for CILs, we really look at it from an individual advocacy and systems advocacy perspective. And also really ties nicely into supporting division related services and transition related services. And then at times, also, even outside of that, some other SIL related services like youth transition and some other different types of services that I'm sure Kimberly can hit on pretty hard in a minute. So sorry, Kathy, back to you.
No, I knew I was skipping ahead and I didn't want to do that, but it just felt, natural to just go on with it. But so here's where SILCs are pivotal. You need to be the one to make sure that all of the, certainly all of the IL network is involved, but also those other disability partners in your state are involved as well. And chances are some of them are already going to know about it. But, in Kansas, we got together as a group and we met with ACL and we talked about a lot of different things. And the group just instinctively started to bring up issues in Kansas, like, oh, what about this? And what about, the videos? We have a provider in Kansas that is they basically brag about their control room that they have with all the video options where they can watch people in their homes, in their settings, and they really sell it as this huge safety net. And of course, we come in there and we think, we're horrified and think, oh no, who would want that? What a violation of your privacy and your rights. And, so then we start asking a whole bunch of questions and ACL is like, wow, good stuff. And they really kind of helped us determine how we can bring this to CMS, because CMS will come to your state and they will do a 1-hour call with you beforehand, before they come and actually do the on-site visit. And they helped us set up that call. After the ACL meeting, our Kansas group got together and we added even more people. So it's this phenomenal group of different disability organizations that have now come together, that is bigger than any other coalition or, work group or whatever that we have already. And it's from all different types of disability settings and services and everything. And we had a 2-hour meeting recently. We've set up several more. And we said, okay, what are our priorities? And we have to be concise because we have 1 hour. And really the main point of that 1 hour is to hear from consumers. And so we had to integrate that into it too, because, providers, we like to take control and do the talking, but it was really important that we pushed the consumer part of this and to hear from consumers and their voice. So some of the things we've worked on in Kansas, the points to get across to CMS in our very limited time on the phone call, because they probably have a listing of, Kansas isn't big population wise. So 5 or 6 settings that they'll see. Most of the time CMS is going to at least 2 different areas of your state. Some of the bigger populated states, they're gone to like 8 different places. In Kansas, I have to assume they're probably going to go to 4 or 5. So we said, what are the most problematic examples of assisted living? And then, everybody talks and goes through their experiences, and, we list some stuff. And then we said, well, what are the most problematic examples of day service settings? And again, the whole conversation happens. And then the most problematic example of residential settings, the most problematic examples of providers that provide more than one service. And then the most problematic example of the use of video monitoring. Again, that is just, as a SILC, I had no idea that was happening in our state. It's been a long time since I've worked at a center and been boots on the ground and provided the services. And so, boy, it's a little disturbing to hear about the things that are seen as progressive by certain providers and what they're doing. But the SILC really can have the role in facilitating this group, or they don't have to. Our P&A really took over and did all that. But we provided, what we can do to help, bringing in centers that weren't there at the table, that kind of stuff. And if you think about this, SILCs, it's part of the responsibilities and the authorities, coordination with those centers, coordination and collaboration and partnerships with other disability organizations. That's truly what this means and why SILCs should be involved. So you can put stuff in your spills too. Quite honestly, Kansas doesn't have something specifically about the HCBS settings rule or the HCBS transition stuff, but I guarantee you we will in the next one. So that's another way that SILCs play a major role in this, is taking a look at that and what your state is going to do. So Kansas, we have our meeting with CMS over the phone on February 8th, and then we will have our in-person site visit on March 14th. Everybody is supposed to, be meeting all the settings rules by March 17th. But, what do you do now? What if they've already come to your state? Well, we have to be continuing this conversation as that collaborative group for the future. Because once they come to your state and they say, oh, here are your issues, and they'll give you a list of things that need to change, then we need to make sure that our state is changing those and that our state has the staff to do that. In Kansas, we have lost well over 50-60% of our state staff that would go out and monitor this kind of thing. So that's where SILCs come into play. This is systems advocacy, and you can push for this and say why it's important, bring this up at your SILC meetings and talk about it. And I know I saw some hands. I want to make sure we get to the questions.
I saw everybody else, they put it down, but if you do have a question, you can go ahead. I'm gonna guess that you answered it, maybe.
And this is Amber. I'll just add, so in Indiana, there was an unfortunate situation where there was a member of another organization that really was leading, sort of bringing different groups and entities together in our state, all the various players, that Kathy talked about, also including our long-term care ombudsman, our AARP, statewide chapter and organization, and a handful of others. And what was really discouraging to find out from ACL at one point, in connection between NASILC, was that independent living, as a result of sort of this leader in charge of bringing this group together, was, I hate saying like intentionally left out, but the individual was very much aware of independent living, very much aware of me, the SILC, the CILs. And so sort of scrambling last minute, right, to get involved and engaged at a SILC level was really tough, because I sort of had to make sure that ACL was aware and knew to please add the SILC, in our content information to that list, of any kind of future engagement and opportunities, right, to do this work and get involved. So I hope many of you or all of you guys don't have to experience those kind of things in our state, but I'm sure we've all encountered times where, different groups and organizations can be somewhat territorial, and it's just extremely unfortunate that happens. So and if that is something that has occurred or is occurring in your state, just reach out to your project officer at ACL or NASILC or April or whomever, if you're a SILC or a center, and we'd be happy to get you pulled and connected right to the right folks to get engaged in this space with the other organizations and groups and entities, right, that are sort of already engaged and working together in the various states and not against each other and in not in a competitive manner, because that is not going to ultimately help any of our peers, right, in the end in our state. So working better together, making sure we come together despite some of our differences we might have and may not always be on the same page, but I'm pretty sure all of us are in favor of supporting and making sure these very things we're talking about today in terms of rights and protections for our peers with disabilities is something we all are behind and will continue to be as we move forward, not only when it comes to independent living, but even outside of our organizations. So just want to add that.
And this is Kimberly, and I did put some information in for folks that are planning or getting site visits and how you can help. So our Center for Independent Living actually took the lead. We partnered with the other ACL grantees, which I really encourage you to partner with, which is your Protection and Advocacy System, your University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, the DD Council. And so we partnered with them along with the other two centers, and we led the conversation. We were also a little uncomfortable with the approach, because the approach was to get as many consumers as you could to be part of this conversation to discuss the concerns. But when someone is being either abused or neglected, or when they have concerns about their facilities, that's probably not the best way to ask for their input, is to have them be on a call with an open forum call with potential providers. And so what we did is we ended up sending out a survey, and I did put it in the chat, but we wanted to get the information in a variety of different ways. So we did some interviews if folks wanted to call us. So we made the process as accessible as possible so that we could bring their voices to the table, so that if there are any concerns, that their rights and are being protected. And of course, our organization was helping them either transition or get other services from Disability Rights South Carolina. So we led the conversation with the on the call, but we also would only let me go back. We were supposed to provide input from consumers, but I also know that every other states kind of before us really included a lot of provider information. And also there were families that were on the calls, and that was heavily pushed as well. Our state decided to do something a little bit different. We said, this is an opportunity for consumers to use their voice. So when the survey that we collected, we did have a drop-down box of, who do you represent if you're an individual, if you're a parent, and we only brought the input on the call. Of course, we gave everything over to ACL and CMS, but we only brought the concerns of the consumers forward, because that is who people need to hear from. I think parents are vocal and loud in their own ways, and sometimes it's against the IL philosophy. And so we wanted to make sure that we are bringing the voices of people with disabilities. And so we led the conversation, and just some of the input was, we did have a lot of violations that came up, but the concerns that we noticed, and I'm just going to read something really quick that a consumer put to be something that they would like to improve. One said, to be honest, I just want to be happier. I don't like it here. To be, some say, I want control over my money. And so the same things that we were trying to look for, they were telling us what they wanted. They want these rights. They should be given these rights. But honestly, a lot of times the providers are taking over and not honoring. And something that we also noticed during the work that we did in South Carolina was that the final rule that South Carolina had approved and moved forward is just a piece of paper. Nobody is enforcing it. And so that was a real eye opener for Disability Rights South Carolina as well, as there's no enforcement to this. So what can we do as a network of partners that really want community-based services in South Carolina? What can we do to help enforce it? So it was a really wake-up call for different steps of not only partnerships, but other services to improve on and how we can better reach consumers.
Thank you, Kimberly. Sierra, this is Amber. Sierra, can you jump to the next slide? It might be the one. There's some cute, well, if there's, yeah, this is sort of gets to a little bit of where I think Kimberly was going around how can we start to understand and know where to access and find resources. And one of those we've already talked about, which is that HCBS state transition plan heightened scrutiny report page, right? That's that number 2 link on this slide. And the first link though, which on this slide, which is called In the Know Resources for the HCBS settings rule, is really about it's guidance, it's federal guidance and technical assistance on the rule from CMS. So I'm sure, as you can imagine, it's not in plain language at all. Like, I'll just say it like that. It is probably language you're going to have to read maybe over and over a couple different times to be able to wrap your head around some of it, not all of it, but just some. But it does have some really good information and ways to help sort of, navigate through what this really, really means and how it can really be of benefit to us in the independent living network and just for peers with disabilities and even folks in the aging community with all various types of disabilities, right, in our states. So there's that resource as well. That's a really good one that has like various types of different guides and even some technical assistance that's, offered to various states right across the country when doing this work. And the other thing to remember is there was a requirement for the states to come together as a task force or create these groups or work groups or whatever you wanted to call them in your state of various sort of key stakeholders, which should have included consumers to help develop these statewide transition plans. I know in Indiana that there were not very many, if any, consumers engaged and involved on that task force. And it was very unfortunate to hear that. And so some of those are still working together and coming together and may continue to exist in your state moving forward. It may shift and be called something different and may try to operate as sort of like an advisory group or coalition to sort of try to monitor and provide some level of oversight by the state in terms of compliance or ongoing compliance with the rule. No promises or guarantees that's what's happening. The task forces and groups were really created to craft these plans, but the hope is, fingers crossed, and this would be something as SILCs and CILs to do, is to ask the very state agency who has the responsibility for oversight of this plan and insurance of compliance of the plan and ongoing compliance. Will you continue an advisory group? And I might even suggest and ask, maybe it is just solely consumer based of consumers who reside in these particular types of HCBS settings to ensure the state actually gets feedback and input from those folks on violations that are actually happening of those rights and protections that Kimberly went through in the beginning of this presentation. So if you find though in your CILs that you're working with consumers and you are fully aware of what the rule says an individual's right in that HCBS setting is and that is being violated repeatedly, there may be many of them, you've worked with the consumer, and then the consumer's even notified the provider entity in that setting that this is not in line with my person-centered plan, that this is happening and needs to be changed. It's not, I have a right to privacy, I have a right to have a lock on my door, I have a right to say who can come and go into my home and my place and where I'm living. And, I'm hungry at 2 a.m. I want a granola bar, or I want, a fruit plate, whatever it is, and I can't get access to that. Those are rights violations. So all of the plans consist of what are called grievance procedures, and those are supposed to be laid out, and they're supposed to be pretty transparent. I would strongly suggest CILs and CILCs dig into those state plans for your state and find the section that is applicable and talks about what the grievance procedure is and will be if a setting, an HCBS setting, is violating and not remaining or staying in compliance with what the rights are, and consumers are having a lot of difficulty or issues with that. And you can help consumers file those grievances and walk you through what that looks like, or you can walk the consumer what that looks like, how that happens, to understand that grievance process, and then who to contact right in your state to file a grievance and how to make that happen, and then what follow through on all of that in terms of an investigation and looking into that grievance, consists of, and what the outcome will be then, as far as the state circling back to that particular setting to address any out of compliance or violations of the rule issues. So I don't know if anybody else has anything else to add to that, Kimberly or Kathy, but I wanted to make sure we hit on those resources. And really, one of the best ways I think that states, SILCs, CILs, and all the various entities, right, advocacy organizations and consumer organizations doing this work and involved in the state can really make a huge impact is filing grievance after grievance after grievance after grievance. That is going to get more red flags than anything else. So I just strongly recommend folks from SILCs and CILs really dig into that grievance process, and CILs with your consumers really utilize and leverage that opportunity you have to do that heavily. You can get something resolved without having to go down that path. And a setting is like to say, you are so right. Thank you for bringing that to us attention. This is what we've fixed and this is what we're doing now. Easy peasy. I think a lot of us know that is not always the typical experience, folks with disabilities and folks in the aging community have with some of these providers and settings. So anyway.
And Amber, I would just warn that even if you do help a consumer file a grievance, just don't count on that 100%. So making sure that you help them out of the situation by, the services that you offer, or connecting with your protection and advocacy too. So don't count and just think because you did file a grievance or the consumer filed a grievance that they're going to come down and fix things really quickly. That process is really lengthy.
Right. Yes, thank you for adding to, thanks. Yes. So I think maybe we're at a Q&A point again.
And I will, I'm actually going to point this towards Kathy for in the chat of like, why are only 15 states receiving site visits? I know you mentioned that number earlier.
Yeah.
And then some states still don't have a final approval on their plan, despite their initial approval was completed on 2019. Is CMS just this far behind?
Yeah, so this is Kathy. Basically, it's a simple answer. They don't have enough staff. So they're only going to be able to do so many every year. It'll be interesting to see, since the deadline for this is March 17th for the nation, what they do after that. I know they do have some states scheduled after March 17th, but it'll be interesting to see if they take a look at how many states did comply, how many states are still out of compliance. But that's where your SILCs and your CILs come into play, is you can continue to push these collaborations forward and make sure that CMS knows that your state is not following the settings rule. They did not clean up their act. They didn't do what they were supposed to do. One of the ways that Kansas SILC is going to do that is first, the silk itself has to be educated on this. And so one of the ways we're doing that is not only just me being as knowledgeable as I possibly can and joining in, on the, the coalitions and the collaborations on this, but we have a board meeting coming up. I'm going to do like a 20-minute kind of quarterly training on the HCBS settings rules. So the board is familiar with really what this is and what it means to our state and the people in our state with disabilities. But the push has to be there for the future and holding the state accountable. Our state's already told us that they have less staff and that they're doing the best they can and that they have new staff. And one of the things that I did was join the provider call. So there's two different groups working on this. It's a very interesting dynamics. You have the stakeholder groups, the disability organizations, and they're working on it, and they're trying to say, hey, this is what's going wrong. This is what's happening. We're hearing this from our consumers. And then you have the provider group who's providing the settings and getting paid by HCBS to have these settings and follow these rules and be in compliance. And I joined that call too, because it's public, it's open to anybody. And it was incredibly disturbing to hear my state tell these providers, oh, we'll work with you. Don't worry about it. We're all learning. We'll figure it out. And I thought, oh, no, hold their feet to the fire. That's what I wanted to say. But so I encourage you to do that too. Be on every part of this. Listen to the providers, what they're saying, and know and be knowledgeable on that. Listen to what your state's saying and listen to what your disability organizations and your consumers are saying.
I see in the chat, Brooke mentioned from Oregon site visit is scheduled for April 17th to the 20th after the March deadline, another extension. So they will be continuing past the March 17th deadline to do these site visits. We just, I think today got notification that Idaho's coming up later on as well. So they're going to be keep doing some of these site visits. It's just not going to be everybody, to the earlier question of it's only so many that they'll do at a time. And I wanted to make sure we can definitely go to questions, but I want to make sure we just share this piece as well. This has been a question that y'all have asked of what can y'all do? So this is what you can do after those calls. And if your call has already happened, but also even if your call is coming up or your site visits are coming up, these are all still things you can do too. So.
Yeah. This is Amber. Thanks, Sierra. Yeah, I will just sort of say, just because March 17th comes doesn't mean compliance with this rule is going to continue to be how these settings operate and function. And just like we as advocates often have to be the enforcers of the ADA and other various types of the laws that we engage in as advocates, kind of comes down to that same kind of situation and scenario when it comes to this rule here. So my hope is that CMS does continue to do these not only after March 17th throughout the remainder of this year, but I'm hoping it just becomes an ongoing sort of revolving type of practice they do on a regular basis every year to ensure they visit states and talk to the various groups and providers in these settings to make sure they are still remaining in compliance and operating as such. Because between administrative related changes, you know, in terms of staff, the care staff there, consumers, right, rotating in and out, things always are changing in these settings in terms of who's there, who's providing the services. And if someone hasn't aware of this rule or new to it, they may not get a whole lot of training or have a very deep understanding of what this actually means and looks like in practice at these particular settings where there's been a lot of changes maybe in staff or administration. So it's just something that is going to have to, it's just one more thing to add to our to-do list to make sure that this is something we monitor as advocates at SILCs and CILs in our state in tandem with those various partners that we've all talked about here today. And so I really love that Kathy brought up and hit on exactly the first point under the SILCs in terms of what are some things you can do to pull in your entire independent living network. And that is to put a goal and or objective in your upcoming new spills. Something around the effect of you have a goal to expand and enhance, right, HCBS in your state. And some of that can look like getting engaged in individual and systems advocacy and all kinds of various activities, right, can be written that spill for that particular objective under that maybe expansion and enhancement goal of HCBS in your state. So those are just some ways to think about doing this that really puts something down in a plan, right, specific to independent living that really says we're committed to this and we're going to leverage this rule in this way and stay engaged at as many levels as we possibly can across the independent living network as centers and as SILCs. So, and then there's ongoing cultivation of state partnerships and collaborations. I cannot stress this next one enough, which is building strong relationships and connections to relevant state agency leadership. I know that something I worked very, very hard and diligently on when I was in Indiana as the Indiana SILC director was spending a significant amount of time really building relationships with key leaders in various state agencies, specifically those that provide a lot of services and supports, right, or have oversight of those programs and services for our peers with disabilities and those in the aging community and the mental health community. And it's been wonderful because I get tagged or tapped, right, from those leaders to be pulled into various types of systems change related opportunities. But then also what's been really nice is if there's an issue consumers are coming to us about, or there's been some challenges that are going on in our state that have been brought to my attention or our attention as a SILC, I can pick up the phone or text one of those leaders and get that issue addressed or nipped in the bud or get my answer addressed if I needed it on the spot or within 24 hours or less. So again, I, reach out to other state leaders and various state agencies in your state beyond your DSC, or ask your DSC to help make those connections, right? And leverage that relationship if you have a really good, strong relationship with your DSC, and ask them to sort of help, build those ties. So, and again, attend and engage in opportunities for public comment on the rule. Don't know that there'll be future opportunity for that, but if there is, keep that in mind. And it's something in another way you can get engaged. And then also SILCs, can do statewide awareness, education, and training events. How about doing something virtually that for your consumers, and you can do this in tandem and in partnership with all your centers. Let's do a virtual training on what everybody's rights and protections are per this rule. Let's get them engaged. Let's pull them into the mix and fold so they become better, stronger, more empowered advocates, right? And who knows? I mean, I think we've all probably witnessed and experienced where getting folks and our consumers involved in that way, the benefit that yields such a substantial benefit beyond addressing those specific, issues that we are trying to tackle just in that effort. So, Kimberly, do you want to hit on the SILs?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to just say something. This opportunity is coming to IL to also be involved. And so this is often an opportunity that we're often left out of. And so we do need to make sure that we're jumping in and really showing the power of our services, but showing the power of our advocacy and our voices. As consumer-led organizations, we should be involved. We should not be ignored in these conversations. And so just as for Centers for Independent Living, this is a great opportunity to bring your consumers in and bring just people with disabilities in your state, involve them in discussions around this and have them do something about this. That was very uplifting for a lot of our consumers to be able to advocate for what they actually want because their voice is often not heard. It's a great opportunity for grassroots advocacy, but also systems advocacy to bring the community together. I don't think a lot of even the providers realize the intensity of the final rule. And so bringing us all together and educating each other is really powerful. Just cultivation of community partnerships. We do everything with our DD council, or you said we were at the table representing IL and consumer driven services. And so really important to work on those partnerships so that you can be a really good team in your state to move forward. Just engaging opportunities for public comment. And I will say public comments are often not accessible. And so how can your organization host a public comment time where you can make it accessible and gather information and input and send it over to your state Medicaid or CMS. And so really making sure that you're working even with your Medicaid agency to make sure that the public comment is accessible. I mean, if you've even gone to ACL's public comment, it's really complicated. And so we all have to do a better job with making sure information is getting out there that is fully accessible. And then just community-wide awareness, education, and training events. Again, this could be virtual or in person, but let's educate. Let's give our consumers the power to know their rights, but also to know what should not be going on in any of these settings. And engage youth. Youth are very powerful as well. As an organization that serves thousands of youth per year, I will say having youth speak up and using their voice really makes people listen. I mean, that is exactly how we got some minimum wage ending some minimum wage passed in our state is youth. And so people need to hear from consumers. We do not always need to hear from providers or families. We need to hear from consumers.
Awesome. Well, I know we're a little bit past time. If you do have further questions, I encourage you to reach out to NASILC in April. We can continue to either connect you to people that have been doing this work at SILs and CILs, or to anybody that we are working with that are other national partners that have been doing this work as well, to help kind of process of how do you get engaged in this, or what does that look like for you, or troubleshoot anything that you may come across. We want to be able to help everybody get into this work because it's very valuable, as we've talked about. Hopefully this was helpful, and we probably will be having some more conversations on this. Definitely be looking out from NASILC in April to continuously send out stuff of when site visits are happening, when those prep calls are coming, when those scrutiny calls are happening within your state, and when the reports are coming out, so you can see those. We gave you that link, but we'll also be forwarding those out to your state when they come through. Any last thoughts? Okay. All right. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you all have a great afternoon, and we will be sending the recording and the slides out after this call. So thank you.